The morning light filtered through the crystalline walls of the Visaran High Court, casting rainbow patterns across the polished marble floor. Celeste Moreau stood in the defendant's circle, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the colors dance at her feet. She had always found beauty in unexpected places, a trait that made her an exceptional botanist and, apparently, a convenient scapegoat. The courtroom hummed with whispered conversations, the sound echoing off the curved walls. Like the murmur of distant ocean waves, Celeste raised her eyes to the gallery, searching for a familiar face among the sea of curious onlookers and political vultures. Her breath caught when she spotted him, Damien, her 26-year-old son, pressed against the barrier that separated the public seating from the court floor. His dark eyes, so much like his late father's, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart ache. She offered him a small smile, the same one she'd given him as a child, when thunderstorms frightened him in the night. "Be brave," her expression said. "This too shall pass. Order in the court." The herald's voice cracked like a whip, and the conversations died instantly. "The Honorable Council of the Sara will now render judgment in the matter of Celeste Moreau versus the state." The 5 council members filed in through their private entrance, their robes shimmering with threads of precious metals that caught the light with each step. At their head walked Governor Marcus Kane, a man whose handsome features had been carved hollow by years of political maneuvering and moral compromises. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his bearing regal, but Celeste noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he took his seat at the center of the elevated bench. "Celeste Moreau." Governor Kane's voice filled the chamber, amplified by the acoustic properties of the crystal walls. "You stand accused of sabotage, sedition, and the attempted assassination of a government official through botanical warfare. How do you answer these charges?" Celeste lifted her chin, her voice clear and unwavering. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I have dedicated my life to nurturing growth, not destroying it." A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery. In the weeks since her arrest, the case had become a sensation. The governor's prize garden, a marvel of exotic flowers from across the galaxy, had withered and died overnight. The timing couldn't have been worse. Important trade delegates from 3 systems were visiting, and the garden's destruction had embarrassed the administration publicly. Celeste happened to be the head botanist for the municipal gardens, and she had been one of the last people seen near the governor's estate. In a government desperate to appear competent and in control, she made a perfect target. Councillor Thorne, a thin man with calculating eyes, leaned forward. "The evidence speaks for itself. Residue from your personal laboratory was found in the soil samples. Your fingerprints were on the irrigation controls. You had means, motive, and opportunity. The residue was from fertilizer I developed for the public gardens." Celeste replied calmly, "My prints were on the controls because I was called in to consult on the system 3 weeks before the incident. As for motive," she spread her hands, "what possible reason would I have to destroy something beautiful? Professional jealousy." Councillor Voss interjected, her voice sharp as broken glass. "The governor's collection was superior to anything in the municipal system. Perhaps you couldn't bear to see your work overshadowed." Celeste's attorney, a nervous young man named Felix Hartwell, rose from his seat. "Your Honors, there is no direct evidence linking my client to this crime. The prosecution's case relies entirely on circumstantial evidence and speculation. The burden of proof has not been met." Governor Kane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Celeste caught the micro-expression and felt a chill run down her spine. She had worked in government long enough to recognize the look of a man who had already made his decision and was merely going through the motions of justice. "Furthermore," Felix continued, his voice gaining strength, "we have character witnesses who will testify to Dr. Moreau's dedication to her work and her spotless record of public service. She has spent 15 years beautifying our city, creating green spaces that have improved the quality of life for thousands of citizens." "Character witnesses are not evidence," Councillor Thorne dismissed with a wave of his hand. "We cannot allow sentiment to cloud our judgment in matters of state security." The trial proceeded with mechanical precision. Witness after witness took the stand, some genuinely believing in Celeste's guilt, others clearly coached in their testimony. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman driven to desperate acts by professional frustration and personal grievance. The defense struggled against the tide of predetermined narrative, each objection overruled, each piece of exculpatory evidence deemed inadmissible. Through it all, Celeste remained composed, her hands steady, her voice calm when called upon to speak. But in the gallery, Damien's hands clenched into fists as he watched his mother's character assassinated, with the same systematic precision that had apparently been applied to the governor's garden. As the afternoon wore on, the inevitable became clear when the council retired for deliberation. They were gone for exactly 17 minutes, barely enough time to walk to their chambers and back. The swiftness of their return sent a message as clear as any verdict. In the matter of Celeste Moreau versus the state, Governor Kane announced, his voice carrying the weight of finality, "This council finds the defendant guilty on all charges." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Someone in the gallery gasped. Felix dropped heavily into his chair, his face pale with shock and defeat. And Damien rose slowly to his feet, his dark eyes never leaving the governor's face. "The court hereby sentences Celeste Moreau to death by electromagnetic disruption, to be carried out at dawn 3 days hence." Kane's voice cracked, slightly on the last words, but he continued, "This court is adjourned." As the council members filed out, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the gallery, Celeste turned one last time to look at her son, the boy who had brought her wildflowers as a child, who had grown into a man of brilliant intellect and passionate convictions, stood frozen in the crowd, his world crashing down around him. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, something passed between them, not the gentle comfort she had offered before, but something darker, a recognition of injustice, an acknowledgement of the price that would be demanded in return. As the guards approached to lead her away, Celeste mouthed 3 words to her son, "I love you." But the look in Damien's eyes, as he watched her disappear through the prisoner's exit, spoke of something far more dangerous than love. It spoke of a brilliant mind calculating the precise point of pressure needed to bring down an entire system. The court emptied slowly, the spectators filing out in subdued clusters, their whispered conversations filled with shock and political speculation. But Damien remained standing in the gallery long after the others had gone, staring at the empty defendant's circle where his mother had stood. 3 days. He had 3 days to save her, or the rest of his life to make them pay. The morning light continued to filter through the crystal walls, casting its rainbow patterns on the marble floor. But to Damien, the colors looked different now, not like hope and beauty, but like flames waiting to be born. The electromagnetic execution chamber hummed with a low, ominous frequency that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of those who witnessed it. Damien Moreau stood pressed against the observation window, his breath fogging the reinforced glass as he watched the technicians make their final preparations. His mother lay strapped to the metal table below, her eyes closed, her face peaceful despite the circumstances. He had spent the last 3 days in a desperate whirlwind of appeals, bribes, and increasingly frantic attempts to find some legal avenue to save her. Every door had been slammed shut, every contact had turned away, every hope had been systematically crushed by the inexorable machinery of the Saran justice. Commencing electromagnetic disruption sequence, the lead technician announced, his voice crackling through the intercom, "Neural pathway termination in 60 seconds." Damien's hands flattened against the glass, his knuckles white with strain. In the chamber below, Celeste opened her eyes and looked directly at him through the one-way window. She couldn't see him, but somehow she knew he was there. Her lips moved silently, forming words he had heard countless times throughout his childhood. "Be good. Be better than this." The energy discharge lasted exactly 37 seconds. When it was over, the woman who had taught him to see beauty in the smallest flower, who had bandaged his scraped knees and celebrated his engineering achievements, was gone. Damien stood at the window for another hour after the chamber had emptied, watching technicians clean the equipment with efficient, practiced movements. They handled his mother's body with the same mechanical indifference. They might show a broken piece of machinery, no reverence, no acknowledgement that a brilliant, gentle soul had just been extinguished for a crime she didn't commit. When he finally turned away from the window, Something fundamental had shifted inside him. The loving son who had entered the prison that morning was gone, replaced by something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. The Rusty Coil Tavern sat in the industrial district of New Thesara, its neon sign flickering intermittently in the perpetual twilight created by the towering factory smokestacks. It was the kind of place where questions weren't asked and conversations weren't remembered, making it perfect for the kinds of meetings that officially didn't happen. Damien sat in a corner booth, nursing a glass of Andromedan whiskey that had long since gone warm. He'd been waiting for nearly 2 hours, but patience had become a luxury he could no longer afford. The funeral had been that morning a small, private affair attended by perhaps a dozen of his mother's colleagues from the botanical department. The rest of the Thesara had already moved on, the execution becoming just another piece of yesterday's news. "You look like a man with nothing left to lose," a voice said from the shadows beside his table. Damien looked up to see a woman sliding into the booth across from him. She was perhaps 40, with silver-streaked auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun and intelligent green eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his appearance. Her clothes were expensive, but understated, the kind worn by someone who had once moved in government circles, but no longer advertised the fact. "Vera Sinclair," she said, extending a hand across the table. Former counselor Vera Sinclair, to be precise. Damien had heard the name. 3 years ago, Sinclair had been one of the rising stars of the Saran politics, a reform candidate who had promised to clean up the corruption that plagued the colonial government. Then, abruptly, she had resigned her seat and disappeared from public life. Rumors suggested she had discovered something that made continued participation in the system impossible. "I know who you are," Damien replied, not taking her offered hand. "The question is, what do you want with me?" Vera lowered her hand without apparent offense, leaning back in the booth with a slight smile. "I want to offer you something that the legal system couldn't. Justice. Justice is dead," Damien said flatly. "They killed it this morning along with my mother." "No," Vera said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Justice was murdered 3 years ago when I tried to expose the corruption networks that control this planet. Your mother's execution was just the latest casualty in a war that's been going on for decades." She reached into her jacket and withdrew a small data pad, placing it on the table between them. "I've been watching you, Damien. Your work with quantum resonance engineering, your innovations in structural harmonics, you're brilliant. More importantly, you understand systems, how they work, where they're vulnerable, how they can be redesigned." Damien glanced down at the data pad, then back at her face. "You're talking about terrorism." "I'm talking about surgery," Vera corrected. "Precise, targeted removal of a cancer that's eating this world from the inside out. The same people who murdered your mother have been systematically destroying anyone who threatens their power. Scientists, journalists, activists, anyone who might expose their crimes or challenge their authority." She activated the data pad, and holographic images began floating above its surface. Financial records, communication logs, shipping manifests, a bewildering array of data that painted a picture of systematic corruption, reaching into every aspect of the Saran society. "Governor Kane isn't the head of this network," Vera continued. "He's just a figurehead, a pretty face to put on decisions made by others. The real power belongs to a consortium of off-world corporations that have turned the Thesara into their personal mining operation. They don't care about the colonists, the environment, or anything except extracting maximum profit with minimum oversight." Damien studied the holographic displays, his engineer's mind automatically beginning to identify patterns and connections. "Why come to me? You could take this to the media, to the colonial authority," Vera laughed. But there was no humor in the sound. "The media is owned by the same corporations. The colonial authority receives kickbacks that ensure they look the other way. I've tried working within the system, Damien. It doesn't work because the system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed." She leaned forward, her green eyes intense. "But you know what I learned in my years on the council. Every system has pressure points, places where the right application of force can cause catastrophic failure. I know where those points are." You know how to apply the pressure." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of her proposition hanging between them like a loaded weapon. Round them, the tavern's other patrons continued their own conversations, oblivious to the revolution being planned in their midst. "What exactly are you proposing?" Damien asked finally. Vera smiled, and for the first time since they'd begun talking, it reached her eyes. "The complete dismantling of the power structure that killed your mother. We start with their financial networks, the hidden accounts, the money laundering operations, the bribery systems that keep their puppets in line. Then we move to their infrastructure, the communication networks that coordinate their activities, the transportation systems that move their illegal shipments, the security systems that protect their assets." She gestured to the holographic displays. "It would take months of careful planning, precise timing, and absolute commitment. When we're finished, the corrupt system that rules the Sara will be nothing but smoking ruins, and the innocent people who get caught in the crossfire." Damien asked. "There will be some collateral damage," Vera admitted. "There always is in any significant change. But ask yourself how many innocent people die every year under the current system. Your mother was innocent, so were the whistleblowers who disappeared last year, and the activist who died in that convenient accident, and the journalist who suffered that sudden heart attack." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her skin was warm, her touch surprisingly gentle. "For someone proposing such drastic action, I can't promise you that your mother's death will have meaning if you walk away from this," she said softly. "But I can promise you that if you help me, it won't have been in vain." Damien looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. In her eyes, he saw the same thing he felt burning in his own chest, of fury so pure and focused that it had crystallized into something approaching clarity. "When do we start?" he asked. The basement of Vera's safe house was a testament to 3 years of careful preparation. Computer terminals lined the walls, their screens displaying streams of data from across the Saran system. Maps covered every available surface, marked with symbols and notations that tracked the movements of key personnel, the schedules of important shipments, and the locations of critical infrastructure. "Welcome to the revolution," Vera said as they descended the stairs. "Population 2. Over the following weeks, Damien threw himself into the work with the same passionate intensity he had once reserved for his engineering projects. He studied the financial networks with the eye of someone who understood complex systems, identifying choke points and vulnerabilities that even Vera had missed. He analyzed the infrastructure layouts with an architect's precision, finding the exact points where targeted damage could cause maximum disruption, with minimum risk to civilian populations. As they worked together, their partnership evolved into something deeper than shared purpose. Late nights bent over computer screens led to conversations about their dreams for a better the Sara. Shared meals became discussions. The first domino fell at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, when the primary financial server of the Saran Colonial Bank experienced what would later be described as a catastrophic quantum encryption failure. In reality, Damien had spent 6 weeks writing a virus that could navigate the bank's security protocols, like a key turning in a well-oiled lock. Vera watched the data streams cascade across her monitors from their new command center, an abandoned warehouse in the factory district that Damien had retrofitted with equipment purchased through a maze of shell companies and black market contacts. The virus was already spreading through the interconnected financial networks, copying transaction records and exposing hidden accounts that had remained secret for decades. "Transfer complete," Damien announced, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces with the fluid grace of a concert pianist. 17 billion credits in illegal transactions, 43 shell companies traced back to off-world corporate interests, and approximately 2,000 documented bribes to government officials, including Governor Kane, Vera asked. "Especially Governor Kane," Damien replied with grim satisfaction. "He's been taking payments from Nexus Corporation for 8 years. The man who condemned my mother for poisoning plants has been helping poison an entire planet." The stolen data was already being disseminated through every communication network on the Sara. Anonymous broadcasts interrupted regularly scheduled programming to display bank statements, showing massive payoffs to council members. Public terminals in government buildings suddenly began printing evidence of corporate kickbacks. Even the luxury shopping district's advertising screens were hijacked to show proof of the conspiracy that had been bleeding the colony dry. Vera felt a surge of dark satisfaction as she watched chaos spread across the planet's information networks. For 3 years, she had collected evidence that no one would publish, documented crimes that no authority would investigate. Now, finally, the truth was burning through the Sara's consciousness like wildfire. Her personal communicator chimed with an encrypted message from one of her remaining contacts in the government. She opened it to find a brief text: emergency. Session called. Kane's finished. They're looking for scapegoats. Phase 1 successful. She announced. They're in full panic mode. But Damien was already moving to the next phase. His hands moved across multiple control surfaces simultaneously, activating programs he had been refining for weeks. Infrastructure attacks commencing, starting with their private communication networks across the city. Relay stations that had been installed ostensibly for civilian use, but actually served the corporate consortium's secure communications, began experiencing systematic failures. One by one, the hidden channels that allowed the real rulers of the Sara to coordinate their activities went dark. Next target, Vera asked, though she already knew the answer. The spaceport. Damien replied, specifically, the cargo handling systems for private corporate shipments. The Marcus Aurelius spaceport was the economic heart of the Sara, processing everything from legitimate trade goods to the raw materials that fed the off-world corporate machine. But hidden within its massive bulk were specialized facilities that handled more sensitive cargo shipments that never appeared on official manifests and generated profits that never appeared in public records. Damien's virus had identified these hidden systems weeks ago, mapping their security protocols and identifying their vulnerabilities. Now, as his programs infiltrated the port's automated systems, those carefully concealed operations began to unravel. Cargo containers that should have been loaded onto outbound ships instead found themselves rerouted to public inspection areas. Shipments of rare minerals extracted from illegal mining operations were suddenly flagged for customs review. Most dramatically, a transport carrying a load of refined chemical weapons, ostensibly agricultural supplies, was grounded when its automated navigation system mysteriously malfunctioned, forcing an emergency landing in full view of the media. The chemical weapons are particularly nice touch, Vera observed, watching news feeds as hazmat teams swarmed the grounded transport. Nothing says massive conspiracy quite like a ship full of illegal military hardware. I learned from the best, Damien replied, though his attention was already focused on the next target. Speaking of which, it's time for your part of the plan. Vera nodded, checking the chronometer on her wrist. She had exactly 47 minutes to reach the central administrative complex before the security shift change. That would give her a narrow window of opportunity. Are you sure about this? Damien asked, looking up from his control interfaces. Once you're inside their systems, there's no going back. They'll know it was an inside job. Vera smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. Good. I want them to know it was me. The central administrative complex rose like a crystal mountain from the heart of New Thesara, its transparent walls designed to symbolize the transparency of government. The irony wasn't lost on Vera as she approached the employee entrance, her forged identification card ready to pass the security scanners that she had helped design. During her time as a counselor, the card worked perfectly. One advantage of having former allies who still believed in her cause, even if they couldn't openly support it. She moved through the building's corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged there, her business attire and purposeful stride making her invisible among the late shift workers who kept the colonial government functioning around the clock. Her destination was the Secure Information Center on the 37th floor, where the most sensitive government data was stored. Getting inside would require not just her access codes, but biometric confirmation that she was authorized to view classified materials. Fortunately, when she had resigned her council seat, no one had bothered to purge her biometric data from the system, an oversight that was about to prove catastrophic. The SIC was guarded by automated systems rather than human personnel, another security measure that Vera had helped implement. She placed her palm on the scanner, allowed the retinal imager to verify her identity, and spoke her authorization phrase into the voice recognition system. Access granted. The computer announced in soothing tones, "Welcome back, Counselor Sinclair." The massive vault door dilated open, revealing a chamber lined with quantum storage matrices that contained decades of government records. Most of it was boring administrative data, but Vera knew exactly which systems contained the files she needed, the ones that documented the systematic cover-up of corporate crimes, the manipulation of elections, and the elimination of troublesome citizens like Celeste Moreau. She plugged Damien's custom intrusion device into the central access port and activated the download protocols. The device was a masterwork of miniaturization, no larger than her thumb, but capable of copying terabytes of data in minutes, while leaving no trace of its presence. As the download progressed, Vera found herself standing before the memorial wall that honored deceased government officials. Near the bottom, almost as an afterthought, was a small plaque bearing her predecessor's name, Counselor James Wright, who had died in an apparent accident just days before she was elected to fill his seat. She had always wondered about that accident. Wright had been asking uncomfortable questions about mining safety, pushing for stricter environmental protections, advocating for worker rights. His death had been ruled accidental, but the timing had been remarkably convenient for the corporate interests he had been investigating. Now, with access to classified files, she finally had the truth. Wright hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered, his vehicle's automated systems hacked to cause a fatal collision. The order had come from the same consortium that had killed Celeste Moreau, implemented by the same corrupt officials who had covered up both crimes. The download completed with a soft chime, and Vera pocketed the device, but instead of leaving immediately, she activated the room's main display system and began uploading the files directly to every public information network on the Sara. Unlike the financial records that Damien had released earlier, these files contained the personal details of the conspiracy, names, dates, methods, everything needed to understand not just the scope of the corruption, but its human cost. The memorial wall behind her suddenly seemed like a monument not to public service, but to systematic murder. Her communicator buzzed with an urgent message from Damien. Security alert triggered. "You need to get out now." But Vera was already moving, her years of political experience having taught her the value of dramatic timing. She had one more stop to make before leaving the building. Governor Kane's private office occupied the top floor of the administrative complex, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city he nominally ruled. Vera found him there at his desk, frantically shredding documents while news feeds played on every screen, broadcasting the evidence of his crimes to a planet in uproar. He looked up as she entered, his handsome features twisted with panic and rage. "You," he said, the word carrying the weight of 3 years of frustrated fury. "I should have had you killed when you first started causing trouble. You tried." Vera replied calmly, settling into the chair across from his desk as if this were a routine meeting. "The traffic